This episode is going to be a bit different, but not too different, as rather than reviewing something, I'm going to delve into something that people in the media criticism sphere do. And I guess in a way, this is a video essay. And rather than using this power to spread some sort of big, prominent message about a world event going on, I'm instead going to make the claim that a superhero is actually perfect for explaining my political beliefs. But before we get into that, we're going to have to talk a little bit about the superhero genre and the media as a whole. Despite what reactionaries like to believe, the media in a lot of places leans heavily towards the right. Makes sense. They're corporations that want to make profit, so naturally, they don't want to implement policies that would hurt said profit. And nowhere is that more prevalent than capitalism central, the United States of America. But they know they can't necessarily have explicit political themes in their media, at least for general media, otherwise it would alienate potential consumers. So they go in a more subtle approach. Enough to drop hints here and there, but also not enough to alienate people who might not agree with the politics being stated. Sometimes it literally isn't politics being stated and people will get mad based on literally nothing. Even if the media in question isn't really done by a person who actually gives a crap about the issue being stated. And each genre and medium sort of have different ways that this is expressed. And one that usually ends up making its way into the discourse is themes regarding comic books. To the point where people nowadays still know what a comic book is, even though we haven't really picked one up in a long period of time, have we? Usually because at the time period, comics were considered the new media, so there was less restrictions regarding it, so people were more expressive of their views. However, as it became mainstream, things started changing. The whole analysis of comic books and politics can kind of be its own video, and I'm not necessarily qualified to go over it, but what you generally need to know is that certain characters have been used or have been interpreted to spread certain political messages. Some incredibly obvious, some not so obvious. Some examples include Batman usually being used to push for some right-wing individualist message, Iron Man essentially serving as an XP for the top 1%. Then you have characters like Superman and Captain America, who are supposed to stand up for the good of the world, but also don't really delve into many criticisms of issues coming from a lot of places, particularly America. Cap getting really neutered in that regard because he is a character that is explicitly built for that interpretation, and even though the writers try to do something with it, they can't go that extra step in order to prevent alienation. Granted, there are some quote-unquote exceptions, the X-Men very much being conceived to spread an anti-racist message, and Green Arrow being openly left-wing. Like I said, they're the exception, not the rule. And also, neither of these are even really popular in the modern day, so most people on the left generally have to grapple with the fact that a majority of their comic book heroes are basically used to spread some sort of right-wing message, to the point where one guy basically made it his entire career to use his comic writing to call this out. However, I think that there's at the very least a tiny nugget of hope. And that's because I believe that the most popular superhero in the modern day is actually a socialist allegory. Very, very bold claim, and I fully admit that this could just be me grasping at straws, but let's go over why I think so. Let's start from the very beginning, the iconic origin story from Amazing Fantasy number 15. Peter Parker is some scrawny nerd who gets no respect, living with his elderly aunt and uncle in a low-income household. He holds immense resentment for this and desires something to make up for it. Fame, fortune, women, etc. One day on a school field trip, he is bitten by a radioactive spider and gets his superpowers. What does he do with said powers? Find a way to make money, of course. In doing so, Pete becomes extremely self-centered. Then when a robber runs past him, Pete lets him go because nobody pushes him around anymore. Said criminal then kills his Uncle Ben. Peter goes after him, discover who it is, and then recites the iconic catchphrase that is synonymous with Spider-Man. With great power comes great responsibility. From that day forth, Peter uses his powers to protect people no matter what. Back to this phrase, at its core, I think it can best describe leftist philosophy. Again, very incredibly baseline, but think about it. With great power comes great responsibility. People on the left don't necessarily oppose power, but they only oppose it when it is used wrong, i.e., not being used to help people. If power is to be used, it needs to be used in a way that is beneficial to humanity. And it comes from the ideal source, a low-income child from Queens, lower to middle class young adult from an inner city. That basically sounds like every DSA meeting. Another thing that's interesting is his major antithesis to one of the other biggest superheroes in the world, Batman. Bear with me. Batman is one of the richest guys in the world, whose biggest enemy is a guy who was very economically lower class. Meanwhile, Spider-Man is economically lower class, and his greatest rival is one of the richest men in the world. And a lot of his other rivals are also pretty wealthy individuals. Now, I know what you're thinking. Come on, this is incredibly baseline. Spider-Man, socialist, that's not really important to his character. If it wasn't, then how come different interpretations of Spider-Man also maintain this mentality? Such as the case of Spider-Man Noir, a version of Peter from the 1930s who is a very explicit socialist. Aunt May and Uncle Ben went from random old people living their lives to being hardcore socialist activists. In Aunt May's introduction, she's literally on a soapbox rallying against Herbert Hoover and FDR, talking about how the proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. And Uncle Ben's death, rather than being tied to Peter's actions, is explicitly tied to socialism, as he led a huge strike against an industrialist named Adolphus Crane, which ended up causing a lot of his sweatshops to close down. Crane then hires Norman Osborn to kill Ben Parker because of this. The iconic quote, "with great power," is actually changed to become more radical. If those in power can't be trusted, it is the responsibility of the people to remove them. Earth 616 Peter Parker is a reformist. Meanwhile, Earth 9214 Peter Parker is a revolutionary. Now, I know there's going to be one major piece of contention regarding this essay's title, and that will be Steve Ditko, the basically creator of Spider-Man, was an objectivist who admired Ayn Rand. Rand being one of the figures that people believe inspired a lot of the Golden Age comic books. And you are absolutely right. The guy who made Spider-Man was indeed an objectivist. And we know for a fact that Ditko used his creative endeavors to express his political philosophy. I should take this moment to pause and try to explain this the best I can. First, who is Ayn Rand? Ayn Rand is a Russian-American author who would use her books to express her viewpoints in regards to a lot of philosophical or political arguments. The two most prominent books that she wrote are The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, both of which were used to express an ideology/philosophy that we all know as objectivism. As I have mentioned a long while ago, objectivism is a really confusing philosophy, as it seems to hold two completely antithetical ideas. That there is objective good and evil, and there is nothing in between, and that a man's only purpose in life is his own personal happiness. Which of course translates into laissez-faire capitalism is the only moral way to run a society. Despite this, objectivism is considered sort of the groundwork for a lot of the modern day right-wing movements, particularly libertarianism, but it has seeped into general right-wing politics. How can I make the claim that the guy that believes in all of this wrote a superhero to not only not espouse that philosophy, but also explicitly espouse the antithesis of this philosophy? There are a couple of things I can say. For starters, writers can write characters of opposing political views. I mean, Alan Moore is an anarchist. And he has written objectivist characters before, so why can't Ditko write a socialist character? Secondly, there was a brief period of time where Peter did espouse some sort of objectivist philosophy. Originally, Ditko wasn't really involved in the writing process, but as he got more involved with the writing process, Peter shifted to the right, most infamously clashing with a bunch of student protesters, which was then met with criticism from within Marvel Studios, who understood that the appeal of Spider-Man and Marvel Comics in general leaned to the left, not to the right. But that leads almost directly into the last point. Due to how Spider-Man's origin story was written, it proves objectivism wrong. If we were to go by the objectivist point of view, Peter should have never become a superhero. When Peter was just doing his show, he was happy. He was getting money. By Ditko's own ideology, Peter is doing his objective good. But what happens when Peter is extremely individualistic and looks out for only himself? His Uncle Ben dies, and not only did he die, his death is directly attributed to Peter Parker's actions. Actions that he was too blind to realize because he was focused on himself, and from that day forward, he decides to do the antithesis, to focus on the greater good, not his own individual good. Because if you know anything about Spider-Man, you know that Peter is freaking miserable as Spider-Man. His job pays bad, his love life is a disaster, his social life is essentially out the window, he's demonized everywhere he goes, a lot of his friends and loved ones literally turn into evil monsters, and throughout his long publication history, a ton of tragic events have happened to him. His life just freaking sucks. So why does he keep doing it? Because with great power comes great responsibility. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click that bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if you're interested in more content from me, you can go to my website, follow me on Twitter, join my Discord, or consider supporting me on Patreon. So, the fact that I don't have a bullet in me right now probably indicates you're rational.
What? What?
Why what?
After all the bullshit you said about wanting to move on, why did you try to continue this?
I know it's kind of weird saying this about like some cringy stick figure animations I made when I was like 13, but in a way, you're sort of like my first step into the creative field. You know, the first sort of test of if I could write a story or whatever. And I know like very early on I like had no clue what I was doing, but as I got older, started like actually thinking about things ahead of time, things started like developing, I guess, and I grew attached to the stories and characters that I made, even though a lot of them were basically just tropes. The wise sage mentor, recolored video game character, celebrities that I changed into like badass war heroes. I couldn't just let you go unfinished. Even if nobody was gonna watch or read or whatever, I wanted to end it for my sake. Give Connoisseur the big epic finale he deserves. Actually do something with Nintendo. Yours was sort of the most interesting because you technically already had a finale. But I thought, no, this could get a better finale. Because I actually thought of, I could insert politics into this, and maybe it'll be slightly more interesting and have like a message.
Yeah, I guess. So what is this supposed to be? Some sort of coping mechanism?
Honestly, I have no freaking idea.
What do you know?
What I do know is, this has been pretty distracting from me making a video.
Will don't let me keep you.
So I take it you don't have an answer either?
Fernando, how am I supposed to know what comes next? I'm just a character in this story.